Getting started on the 1934 Luger holster. This one's it's a whole different kind of bird for me because I haven't seen one like this before. Okay, I've seen a lot of Luger holsters. I've fixed quite a few of them. This one had at one time, there was a tube down here where a cleaning rod got inserted there, and there was another flap, another piece that attached right here, and it came over and attached with the button stud that closes the tool pouch, which is also missing. So I've got to make a tool pouch, the tool pouch closing flap, plus this flap and the tube. My customer, who is going to be referred to as Beehive, has decided to go with all of those pieces, and we're going to do that. Plus, we're going to be repairing this, replacing, the buckle strap. So I'm looking forward to getting that done. This did concern me quite a bit. I'm glad he decided to go along with the repair on that. I will send this, he will get this back, so he'll see exactly really how bad it is. Now, when I originally saw pictures of this, I looked at the top, and you can see there are some holes that look like the stitches have been removed from them. Upon closer inspection, and I actually took a magnifying glass and looked at those really close, the stitches are still in there. The flap is actually stitched down solid all the way across. The holes just look like they're bigger, or kind of look like the stitching has been removed. If you just glance at it and look real quick, it just looks like there's no stitches in them. But what that was is that's where that tube attached inside here that held the cleaning rod. The tube was attached to those few stitches there, and they just added stitches to hold that tube in there. So I'm not going to take the flap off here. I was originally going to take that off, and that would have made it a lot easier to clean this boot polish off of here. So I'm not going to do that. I prefer to keep as much of the stitching intact as possible. There are a few stitches that are popped over here, but it's 4 or 5. It's not going to affect the integrity of the holster. I really don't want to mess with them if we don't have to. And I don't see any need to do that. The rest of the stitching appears to be in good shape, so I'm not going to mess with those if I don't have to. It doesn't make sense to. I will have to take the stitching out of this so that I can replace it, of course. And I'll take that stitching out. I'll put you on the bench. We'll get that taken care of, and we'll get to cleaning this holster. And I will do a first treatment of with some Connolly's Hide Care on there. I will probably, in these spots back here, what they did when they made the holsters, they cut a few grooves in here, real light, shallow grooves, and that facilitated the bending of that piece of leather for the flap. But over time, the dye comes out of there, that kind of thing. What I'm going to do is I'll just kind of add a little dye to that before I hit it with the Hide Care. So I'm going to get this, put the camera down on the bench, and we'll get after that. You gotta have a sharp blade. I like to, these snap-off knives, you know, I've never been a big fan of them. I'm kind of turning a leaf here. I'm starting to like them. I can snap it off. I don't have to look for blades. I got one right here. Very carefully, I'm going to go in here and just start cutting these threads. You don't want to have to, you know, move much. Especially here, a slip with the knife can be catastrophic. Now I'm keeping my blade as I'm in here. I'm keeping it angled up So if I do cut into anything, I cut into the strap that's going to be replaced. There we go. Now, I want to get, it's a pretty relatively thick piece here, so I want to get a measurement on that. A lot of times you can just guess at the thickness. I'd prefer to take a measurement and know how thick I've got here. So I'll just take my little gauge. And I know down here is in your wear spots like this, it's always going to be a little different. I'll measure it in a few different places. And it looks fairly even all the way across. We're looking at about 2.8 millimeters. So, as I recall, I got to get my conversion chart out here. 2.8 millimeters, I believe, is about a 6 to 7 ounce. Let me see what this belt strap is. It's 3.5. I'll be back in about a second or two. I got to get me a piece of leather. Straight over to the scrap box. I keep pieces even this small. And this one is get a hold of it here. 2.9 millimeters. So we're good with that. That will fit just fine. I'm happy with that. The reason I wanted to get all this part taken care of, I can get this dyed as soon as I make sure I've got enough to make this strap out of, which is I've got plenty. So I can set that aside. Better take care of this blade in my old blade bottle. And I will go to picking out these stitches. So now at this point I can go ahead and start, move my garbage can, so I was cleaning. Now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to go dye this leather first so it can get to drying and stuff. And then I'm going to get out my rubbing alcohol and start taking off some of this polish. There is some cracking happening in the lid here, and I want to take care of that, but first I need to get that polish off of there because that polish is really sealing everything in. Boot polish, shoe polish, a lot of it has paraffin in it. Paraffin is a kind of wax that just doesn't let anything breathe, whereas a beeswax will still let everything breathe, to an extent anyway. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to get this piece of leather dyed. I'm going to make a pattern, a paper pattern for this strap. When I made my paper pattern, I made sure I put the holes in there for the belt, or for the buckle. But I want to punch in my stitch holes too so they're in the right spot. And it just saves time if I can do it now, and the dye will get in there when I dye it. So I'm just going to lay my piece on here, center it up as best I can, and put my weight on it so it doesn't move. But so that you can see me, I'll just hold it the best I can. And I'm just going to go through and I can mark them with the chisel. Now this is just 4mm. This is part of my 4mm set, but it's a single prong. And mostly because I don't know the spacing for sure. But now I have them marked on here. Boy, this is oily. Somebody oiled the heck out of that. And you can see that, I think you can see it, that are marked. And then I can just go through now and punch them. And before I go too far, I'm going to set it up here. And I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use a couple of needles to just make sure everything lines up. They're almost covering these outside holes. Those outside holes need to be right at the edge, and they are right at the edge. So I don't know how well you can see that. And it's where they need to be. So at this point I can feel pretty comfortable in that. I have them in the right place. And go ahead and take an edger and edge around that. My brother, sweet fellow that he is, bought me a gift a little while back because he caught one of my videos where I mentioned that I like these Odin bevelers, and he got me the number 5. Let's see how this bad boy does right out of the box. I like it. I didn't even know my brother watched my videos, to be honest. That is exactly what I was looking for. You won't be able to see it in the video, I don't think. But it's a nice rounded edge. Just what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and bevel that, get some dye on it, and then we'll move on with the rest of the holster. I want to get all the pieces dyed, so I want to make my tool pouch as well. I took a piece of paper, or cardstock here, and I just laid out my stitch holes. And at the bottom here, this is my template that I have for the tool pouch. And at the bottom I want to make sure that it's going to be just a little wider than what the stitch holes are. Because of the stitch holes, it should be just, pattern should be a little wider. At the top, it's going to be a good bit wider because we have to leave a little room in there. So it has to flare a little at the top. We have to leave room to fit that tool in there. And that's why it's got to be a little wider at the top. So my pattern is a little wider at the top, but when I'm looking at the stitch line, this one's got a little more abrupt curve to it. So it comes up relatively straight for a while and then it flares out. This one, the one that I made this pattern for, happened to have a more gradual flare to it. This one's more abrupt. Not a big deal at all. I'll just cut a different pattern. That's why I do this, mark these holes, and all I did was I laid the the holster down on like this, and I use a drafting pen because it has a metal tip on it, or pencil. It has a metal tip on it, and I can just kind of stick it through the hole and wiggle it a little bit. Holes are just big enough to do that, and that's how I get my stitch line on there. And I just know that I have to leave it a little wide at the top. These tool pouches were like made out of like a 2 to 3 ounce leather, so I just have a bit of it up on the wall here, and that's what I'll use to make that. Or some thin 3 to 4 ounce. Probably have a thin piece somewhere. I might have a scrap that I can use rather than cutting a piece off of there. And the flap is about the same deal. It's going to be a little narrower, and that overlaps about 4 holes in here. So we just kind of have to account for all of those little idiosyncrasies. This way too I have all my stitch holes marked. So if I take an awl and just poke holes through it, I can punch them through on my leather. I'm going to tape these down and I'm going to punch my holes in them right away. But as I'm getting ready to do something like this, I need to remember that there's a button stud that goes in here. And for a button stud, these were a riveted stud and not a screw-in stud. Riveted studs are a lot harder to use because obviously they're riveted, they're not screwed in. And the Luger holsters, most of them that I've worked on, I've used steel. All the hardware is steel on them. That buckle is a steel buckle. It's not brass. A lot of the train, I got my door open today. A lot of the American holsters used brass. So I have this. It's the closest thing I could come to steel. And it is steel, but it's nickel plated. It's a matte nickel finish on it. It's the closest I could come. But it is steel, so if that matte nickel comes off, and it doesn't come off, I did try to take it off so I could have a plain steel stud. It doesn't come off no matter what I tried, except for sanding. I did not try to sand it off, but it doesn't come off, so it's on there pretty good. Whatever they plated it with is good, so I'm not going to take it off. I would probably ruin the stud. We'll leave it. That's all we can do, and that's where we're going to have it. So I'm just going to use that, and it should be okay. I mean, it's as close to original equipment as we can get, just because a lot of this stuff isn't made anymore. So I'm going to tape these down. I'm going to be able to punch all my holes in it that way, and that way I'll oil it up, and then tomorrow I'll dye it and put some Connollys on it. We'll be ready to install it. And now before I dye them, I'm going to rough them up a little bit, because I want to make sure that that oil is worked in there really well. And really, I don't want them to look new. Even though they are, I don't want them to look it. They're gonna, but let's try to hide some of that fact. I did run the beveler around the edges. I'm not going to burnish the edges by any means, but I just ran the beveler around them just so that they're smoother. You wouldn't have sharp edges on something that's 80 years old. So I'm just going to kind of just rough it up a little bit. Crumple it up. Make it look like an old dollar bill. And it's mostly just to kind of, it'll soften up the leather because it works that oil through everything. I put it on last night. You can see it's still sitting there. But I want it to be, I want these pieces to kind of just look used. I want them to feel good. I do have one other piece that I need to make, and that's that other strap. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a piece of 1-inch wide strap, and I'm going to grab it about 8 inches long or 10 inches long. I got some cut already. From what I'm able to deduce from the pictures that I have, It looks like it's about 1 inch wide. I need to go get some round bar, and I'm just going to get some cold rolled, so I shouldn't have to heat anything to bend it. There were several different styles of cleaning rods that I was able to find that could go in this configuration. One of them was like the artillery rod, had a handle on it like the artillery rod. One of them actually had an oiler on the handle, and the other one was just purely bent round bar. All of them had like a thread on the end for your cleaning patch. So I think those two pieces are good. This is our buckle strap. I'm just going to kind of flex that around. Before even that happens, I'll get the dye on this. I've got to start removing this boot polish. So I will go over it. I will probably not use a whole lot of the alcohol on there, and I will just use rubbing alcohol, because I think I may not even use that. I may have to break out my secret recipe. I can't tell you what it is though. I know I said earlier that if you oil before you dye, that the dye seems to soak in a little better. That's just one coat of dye. That's all it takes. And that's that 5 to 6 ounce leather. The oil, work it around a little, get the leather loosened up a little. The dye soaks right in. It's awesome that way. Now you wouldn't want to do that with a holster or something, because, I mean, oil it is fine, but you want that to be able to retain a shape. But in this case, I don't want it to retain a shape. I want it to have some movement. So this worked out great. My secret formula did not work. I tried it here in this corner, and it didn't even touch it. So I have my Connolly's out because I'm going to use that right away afterwards. As soon as this stuff is able to dry, I want to be able to put something on it. So I'm going to start in a small spot right here, right around the buckle, is where the strap was connected. Is a really spot that was really caked up, because it's one of those spots that will get that way because people don't take the time to clean it out real well. You can see that some of it's coming off. Not as much as I'd like to see though. I'll have to work on this a little bit. Well, I don't always like having to scrub on something like this, but you know, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And it's not the end of the world if you have to add a little color back into something. Long as you're not, like, you know, having to re-dye the entire thing. Most of this holster is actually in really, really nice shape. And the body of it really wasn't bad at all. Actually, the boot polish that was on the body of the holster came off real easy. Just what was on the lid here, because of the cracking and stuff that's going on, was pretty tough. I'm gonna have to go over it with a little bit of dye, just because it's starting to fade the color in a few spots. And I could try to bring it back with the Connolly's, but the Connolly's doesn't have any color to it. I suppose I could try to add some color. I don't think it'll take. Maybe I'll try that. I've never done that with Connolly's. It's just kind of, there's these spots around here where the polish didn't, you know, where they didn't get all the polish cleaned off it. And right up around the edges, they always get the hard corners. It's these spots here that get missed. And across the top where the cracking, mostly where the cracking is the greatest, is where the polish was the worst. So those are the areas that I'm going to have to concentrate on and we'll have to add a little color back. But I'm going to try to put some of this Conley's in a small container and mix it up with some dye and see if that might work. It's worth a shot. It don't cost me nothing, so I'll give that a shot here quick. Well, I think that turned out to be a pretty good idea. It looks like it colored it just the way I needed it to. So I tested it on here and it tinted the leather, which is all I needed it to do, because the dye was still in there. It was just starting to show through some of the leather, so I needed to tint it. Didn't really need to dye it. I didn't want to apply dye if I didn't have to, because who needs to dry out the leather more than it already is? So I think now I can just go through with the regular treatment. I did apply it a couple of times, but it seems to have gotten it down through and turned it black again, and that's what I needed. The top looks okay, so I'm not going to do that. I will put some dye in these where the brown is coming through there. That's going to be beyond what this will do. I'll just use a Q-tip and put a little dye in those spots, and that'll be good. So other than that, the rest of it is ready for some Conleys and get her all treated, and I'll probably give it one treatment now and then one after all the work is done on it. Getting some of my pieces ready to install on the 1943 holster here, and I'm just giving them a burnish because these pieces would have become burnished with use. So I'm not giving them a super duper, you know, like I would on a, they're not going to get a burnish like this. They're just going to get kind of a rough burnish, I guess I could call it. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be a burnish that would appear after years of use. You can see on here, try to get that so you can see it anyway. Let me turn this light on. That might help. You can see here how it's kind of burnished from use. And this is the back side, how that's kind of really smooth there. And I'll have to do some of that on here too to smooth that out. And that's all just from use. I mean, that's how it just got from being used. So I'm not trying so much to duplicate that, but I want it to have some of that appearance. And it's just, I'm just doing a simple water burnish on it. The piece has been oiled and dyed with Fiebing's Pro Dye, which is an oil dye. Just kind of giving it that little bit of burnish that it would have gotten from use. Nothing too heavy, just a little. The back of this I might need to use, I don't know if water is going to do the trick. We'll see here. I'll put a little up here on the top where it's going to be covered anyway, and see if some water will do the job. I think that is going to do exactly the trick. I don't want to use any toconol or anything like that, but that's what the water looks like. So I'm just going to do that on the back side. Do that on the back of these parts too. Just gave that a little burnish too. So I'm going to keep on going here, and I'll be back in a little bit. I need to put my rivet in here, and I think the best way to do this is to put the rivet part in and then put my stud in here. And there's two ways I can do that. I got you over my shoulder today, by the way, because you're not going to be able to see everything otherwise. I can use this, or I can use dead blow or recoilless mallet. Depends on what you want to call them. I got my mat down here. Hopefully that doesn't absorb too much. But I'm going to use that just to kind of steady the stud on there. And we'll just give it a few wraps and hopefully that will set it. We just want to set it so it doesn't turn. There we go. The recoilless or dead blow. Depends on what you want to call it. First ones I found were called recoilless. That's because they hit and that's it. They don't bounce back like a steel hammer would bounce back. The recoilless or dead blow just seems to hit and it's done. So it's on there, doesn't turn. Should work pretty good. It's the best I can do anyway under the circumstances, since I can't get the exact rivets that I need. The next part, I'm going to go ahead and start putting everything together. The flap, the very last hole on the flap, is the first hole here, and then this will go in. So the first hole here is the last hole on the flap. So I'm just going to try to find that. There's usually 4 holes on the flap. And my flap seems like it's too big. But everything lined up. It does seem too big though. Seems way too big. Come to think of it. Let's try. I mean, anything's possible, you know. This pattern, when I made the pattern, I could have made it off of, well, I know I made it off a different holster, because these parts weren't existing in this holster. And I know the holes will line up, but that doesn't always mean much. Well, so I line everything up, and while it didn't seem like it was fitting right, it looks like it's going to be perfect. It just didn't look right when I was sitting it in there. So I'm going to go ahead and put it together, because I put the tool in there and lined everything up, and it closes nicely. It fits perfect over the tool. I couldn't ask it to do any better. So I'm going to go ahead and just put it together. And if it looks messed up after that, I'll take it apart and figure something else out. So let's give her a heck. It might just look funny until it gets together. Now I am going to, when I get to the top on the other side, when I backstitch, that's when I'm going to tie off, and I'm going to tie off on the inside so that it cannot be seen. Come on. I have my thread all dyed and waxed. Most of the thread on here is it's not real super black, and I think that's because when I used the rubbing alcohol to take the boot polish off, I think it kind of took the boot polish off of the thread. So I didn't try to get the thread super black, if that makes sense to you. Alright, now I'm going to such a cumbersome... I almost had hoped that I would have to remove the lid so it would be easier to put this together. But since I didn't have to, I'll just have to deal with some of the cumbersome aspects of the way I'm doing it. One of the downsides of repair work, I guess you'd say. In this first hole, screwed that up now. About par for the course. There it is. Sometimes you got to work a little bit for it. On the bright side, this should go quite a little bit easier than the 1911 holster did. Now the hard one's going to be, I'm going to try to go through here and come out inside the pouch. That's always a good way to break a needle, but I got it through, so I guess that comes with doing this for a couple of days. Now the other one shouldn't be nearly as difficult. Aside from the fact it's a long needle. It's not cooperating. Mostly these scuffs will probably just rub right out. They're not a big deal. We'll just pull it tight. I'll tie a square knot. Being that that is down in there, I will use something to help me push down in. That is going to be too big. There, get off camera there. This will work a little better for that. You can just never have enough pliers, I don't think. No, I just gotta get it cut. There we go. Gonna stuff that in there. Now to tap that down, we'll grab our, get it off the mat here. It does need to be tapped down though, because they were standing pretty proud up here. But my stitching looks pretty good outside. I don't know how well you can see in there. We'll put the tool in there. Nice snug fit, like that. Look at that. Perfect fit. While my thread is drying, I'm going to try to get an idea how long I need this strap to be. So I've just got a couple of needles in here holding the end of it in place. And I can see a mark here, right in the corner here, that I'm going to guess was from the handle of a cleaning rod. Now, I did notice in my research that there was a few different cleaning rods that would have been used. One had an oiler, a little oil can on it. One had a barrel style, like the cleaning rod that the customer sent me, that is for a artillery model. And then there was one that was similar to this. This is by far not right, believe me. It's similar though. It was just a plain piece of metal, and it was kind of threaded on the end for it, kind of threaded. I use that term loosely. It looked like threads. But I can see some marks here, which looks like that's probably where the handle would have sat. And I know that this is where that tube sat that held this end of it. So I can kind of get an idea of how long I need that strap to be. And if I leave just, you know, maybe a little teeny bit extra, and I can make a mark here, right where I need the hole to go. So I've just got a mark with my marking pen here. That's where I'm going to put the hole that goes over the stud, because it uses the same stud. That's why I went with a slightly longer button stud. And the rest of this is probably going to be just enough to make the tube that goes on here, I think. It might not be quite wide enough, but I've got some other leather dyed ready to use, so I'll just go with that if I have to. My hope was that I'd be able to use this. So I'm going to go ahead, punch my hole here, make the end look just like the other end, and that should be about what we need to do. That's what all the reference photos I looked at had, was a very similar design. It was just a plain rectangular strap. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off, probably leave about 1/2 inch, and call that good. We'll see how it looks. I'll be back.